The Mafia boss dragged her into a private room and locked the door. She thought she was getting fired for bleeding on his VIP floor. Instead, the man who controls the city's criminal underworld looked at her and said his selectively mute son just spoke for the first time in over a year and said her name. She has exactly 5 minutes to decide: walk away and let the boy die, or become the mother figure to a mafia dynasty. Let's freeze the frame right here. The shattered glass is still suspended in the air, hanging mere inches from little Luca's face. We are in a ballroom breathing with 300 of the city's untouched elites, dripping in diamonds and sipping vintage champagne. Yet nobody moves. They sit perfectly paralyzed, watching a 6-year-old child flinch from a drunken air. Only one person breaks the frozen tableau. Today, you and I are going to watch this tragedy unfold together, studying the cold anatomy of fear. It is a bitter irony how vast wealth can carve cowards out of men, isn't it? Stick with me, because the lesson here is quiet but profound. True courage rarely belongs to those with fortunes to protect. It always rises from those who have absolutely nothing to lose. The camera tracks Nora. She is 9 hours into a grueling serving shift. By hour 6, the ache in her lower back faded into a dull, merciful numbness. It is that tragic survival instinct. The brain shutting down pain just to keep the body moving across polished marble. She has worked these high society banquets for years, trained to cast her eyes downward. When guests pay $500 a plate, you must erase your humanity. Her manager demanded she be invisible, and she wore that invisibility like heavy armor. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. Sometimes the universe forces the ones hiding in the deepest shadows straight into the blinding spotlight. Life always demands your greatest strength when you are running on empty. She tucks a damp strand of hair behind her ear, lifting her silver tray to slip back into the background noise. But nothing in her 9 years of service could brace her for the sight at table 7. Let's look closely at this corner. Hidden behind a velvet rope, little Luca sits completely isolated. 2 massive guards in tailored suits flank him like stone statues. They do not eat or drink. Their eyes scan the flickering shadows like wolves guarding a fragile lamb. It is a devastating portrait of childhood. A boy surrounded by immense physical force, yet utterly alone under the warm amber lights. It shows us a heartbreaking truth. All the paid security in the world cannot replace the simple warmth of a parent's embrace. The lens focuses on Luca's trembling hands folded perfectly in his lap. No warm food, no sweet drink sits before him. He remains entirely still, his wide eyes scanning the room with the tragic, hyper-aware gaze of a child expecting the sky to fall. It shatters the heart, watching the exact second a boy learns to fear his own shadow. Nora sees him because her survival depends on reading the room, and she senses the massive, aching vacuum around him. Her foot shifts. She wants to cross the floor. But the nearest guard catches her movement, his stare so icy it halts the blood in her veins. He silently dares her to step closer. Sometimes the heaviest burden is knowing when to intervene and when to turn away, because one wrong step can destroy you. So she retreats into the shadows. We have all done it, haven't we? You and I know the quiet shame of walking away from someone else's storm just to keep our own shoes dry. But then the heavy oak doors swing open, and Richard Sterling staggers in. He announces his presence with a booming, arrogant laugh that echoes off the vaulted ceilings. Nora recognizes the type instantly. His face is flushed from expensive bourbon, his tailored suit hanging off his frame. Men like him use volume to mask the hollow echo inside their chests. He scans the room, hungry for a victim who cannot strike back. The harsh truth of human nature reveals itself here. The loudest voices often belong to the weakest souls, desperately begging the world to validate their fragile egos. Nora alters her route, charting a path through the tables just to avoid his destructive orbit. It is basic survival, and it almost works. But as her hand touches the kitchen door, the air in the ballroom turns incredibly heavy. The soft hum of conversation dies. Sterling drags his feet toward the velvet rope at table 7, drawn like a moth to the quietest flame in the room. "Hey kid, are you lost?" he slurs, his words dripping with a sloppy, toxic edge. Luca freezes. The boy does not speak, his gaze locked onto the dark mahogany wood. "Are you deaf? I am talking to you," Sterling barks. The camera catches the boy's tiny knuckles turning entirely white. It is a sickening reality that predators will always hunt the ones who cannot fight back. Nora stops dead, the heavy tray trembling in her hands. Sterling leans over the rope, his heavy hand crossing the boundary to grab the boy's small shoulder. Luca violently flinches. That instinctual, terrified recoil shatters every rule Nora has ever been taught. For 3 agonizing seconds, she is completely frozen. Notice the profound tragedy of this scene. A grand hall filled with the city's elite, a beautiful string quartet playing softly, and a grown man tormenting a child while everyone watches. Even the paid guards stand like stone figures. But then an overpowering wave of empathy drowns out Nora's fear, and she steps forward. True heroes do not wear armor. They are simply ordinary people who refuse to look away any longer. "Sir," she calls out, her voice cutting through the thick silence. The tight pitch betrays the sheer panic flooding her chest. Sterling slowly turns, his face twisting in genuine disbelief that a faceless servant dared to interrupt him. To a man of his arrogance, she is nothing but moving furniture, but Nora smoothly glides between the towering drunk and the trembling boy, placing her own body as a shield. "We just opened a beautiful 2014 vintage. Allow me to pour you a glass," she says, her tone perfectly even. The lighting catches Sterling's nasty, drunken smirk. He has found a new, desperate plaything. It is a bitter lesson about the corrupting nature of power. Those who crave it will break anyone, simply because they enjoy the snap. "I am in the middle of a conversation," Sterling hisses, stepping into her space to force his dominance. Nora refuses to break eye contact, her face a mask of calm glass. "I understand, sir," she replies quietly, "but his security is right here." Sterling throws his head back and lets out an ugly, echoing laugh, looking at the stone-faced guards with absolute disgust. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he shouts. It is the tragic, desperate battle cry of a man whose entire worth is tied to his bank account. Nora shakes her head softly. Finally, the larger guard steps forward. "Sir, I need you to step back," the man rumbles. Sterling's drunken fury instantly pivots. "Who are you to give me orders?" he spits. Pride is a poison that blinds a man to his demise. "Stick with me, because this is the exact moment the tension snaps." Sterling aggressively turns his massive frame back to the cowering boy. "What is wrong with him? He will not even look at me," he growls. Nora's voice cuts in sharper this time, a desperate attempt to pull his focus away. Sterling whips around, his thick fingers clamped around a heavy crystal goblet. Perhaps his drunken mind misfired, or perhaps he wanted to break her spirit. It does not matter. The heavy glass leaves his hand, flying through the air. In a blind flash of pure instinctual courage, Nora twists her shoulder to shield the child. The crystal explodes against her flesh. In moments of true terror, there is no time to plan. Your deepest character simply bleeds through. A collective gasp violently ripples through the golden room. Bright crimson blood begins to trace a slow path down Nora's pale arm. The cut is not deep, but the stark sight of real blood immediately shatters the polite illusion of the evening. These wealthy onlookers can no longer pretend this is just a minor disagreement. The musicians nervously drag their bows for 4 agonizing seconds before the melody abruptly dies. And in that heavy, breathless silence, Nora hears a chilling sound. A heavy wooden chair dragging slowly across the marble floor. She watches Sterling's face. All the flushed red fury drains away, leaving him pale as a ghost. Fate loves to remind the loudest bully that there is always someone darker waiting in the wings. The alcohol evaporates from Sterling's veins, replaced by pure, paralyzing terror. He stares blankly at a shadow materializing right over Nora's shoulder. "Oh," he breathes out, his towering ego collapsing into dust. Nora slowly turns her head. Standing there is Vittorio. He wears a dark charcoal suit without a tie, moving with the terrifying, deliberate grace of a predator who knows the exits are locked. The crowd practically melts away, desperate to escape his orbit. He brings a cold, suffocating weight into the room. This teaches us an undeniable law of human dynamics. True, absolute power never needs to raise its voice or throw a tantrum. It simply enters the room, and the entire world holds its breath to see what it will do next. 2 immaculately dressed men walk a silent pace behind him. There is no frantic rush, no wasted energy. The sea of wealthy elites parts like water before a rising storm. Vittorio is not a chaotic mess like the man trembling before him. Every single movement he takes is calculated for quiet, devastating violence. He halts exactly 2 feet from the drunken heir. He does not raise his hand. He does not shout. He simply locks Sterling in a dead, unblinking stare that stretches into eternity. Sterling, a man who ruins lives for sport, literally forgets how to breathe. "Your name," Vittorio says softly. It is not a request. It is an executioner's bell. The most terrifying sound is never a roar, but a calm whisper right before the world ends. Under the oppressive gold lighting, Richard dissolves into a trembling wreck. "Look, I did not mean any harm," he stutters, his mind entirely short-circuiting. The pathetic plea is instantly swallowed by Vittorio's chilling stillness. "I know what you meant," Vittorio murmurs, his voice a razor in the dark. "And I know what you are. Sit down." The command is a physical blow. Sterling collapses into the mahogany chair, folding like a marionette with severed strings. In the background, Nora lowers her dented serving tray, her frantic pulse vibrating through the metal. As Vittorio shifts, his silhouette dominates the frame, revealing the true monster. You and I must understand this tragic truth. Ordinary bullies only make a lot of noise, but the apex predators who control our destinies operate in terrifying silence. When they speak, you simply obey. The lens shifts to Gideon Romano. To the untrained eye, the silver at his temples paints the picture of a distinguished gentleman. Nora watches him, unaware she is peering into the abyss of a megalomaniac. His cold gaze tracks the blood dripping down her arm, not registering her pain but calculating her utility. Then, the performance begins. Surrounded by 300 paralyzed guests, Gideon drops gracefully to his knees. He levels his eyes with the silent child, manufacturing the perfect, tear-jerking illusion of a devoted father. It is a masterpiece of psychological control. The profound tragedy of human nature is that the deadliest traps are never set with sudden violence. They are laid with a gentle, calculated whisper, perfectly designed to make you drop your guard and step willingly into your own destruction. The camera isolates a single, devastating moment. Leo, Gideon murmurs, his baritonous bard's voice drifting with a sickening, manufactured warmth. The fragile boy reacts instantly. He turns his head with mechanical obedience, like a tiny compass needle, violently forced north. From the shadows, Nora mistakes this for paternal relief. But a lingering close-up reveals the pure, tear-jerking tragedy of trauma bonding. The child leans into the heavy palm of his tormentor, desperately seeking comfort from the exact monster who authored his nightmares. Nora's hand flies to her mouth, her trembling fingers failing to hide her visceral reaction as her body recognizes the horror before her mind does. The universe always provides a warning. That sudden, sickening drop in the pit of your stomach is your soul begging you to run before the darkness consumes you. Fear saturates the air, heavy and suffocating. Nora finally pries a name from her trembling manager, Dennis. The pale man looks as though he has stared into the eyes of death, begging her to disappear into the back hallways, and sew her lips shut. The camera pulls back to Gideon, seamlessly resuming his posture as the untouchable god of this room. The drunk who triggered this tragedy has vanished entirely, erased so silently that Nora never registered his removal. Dennis leans in, delivering a crushing, irreversible truth. He whispers that being noticed by a predator like Gideon Romano is an absolute death sentence. It is a bleak, unforgiving lesson for us all. In a world secretly ruled by monsters, looking away and quietly minding your own business is the only true armor you have to survive. Dennis grabs Nora's uninjured arm, violently jolting her from her paralysis. The framing here exposes the tragic divide between the working class and the elite. Dennis knows that men like Gideon only see them as disposable tools to be used and shattered. An agonizing wide shot follows Nora's gaze across the sprawling ballroom, colliding with Gideon's unblinking eyes staring directly back. He is not just observing her. He is a sniper adjusting his scope, calculating the distance to his prey. Survival instinct finally takes over. Nora turns and flees into the bleak, buzzing, fluorescent nightmare of the employee corridor. We must remember the chilling reality of human predators. When a monster looks at you as though you are a pawn on his chessboard, you never wait to witness his opening move. In the sterile shadows of the prep station, Nora cleans her wound with a mechanical numbness. The searing bite of the antiseptic is the only tether keeping her anchored to reality. The camera focuses on her hands, unnaturally steady even as the image of that hollow-eyed boy and the monster in the charcoal suit loops in her mind. Then, her fragile illusion of safety shatters. The heavy steel door swings open. It is not her frantic manager, but a towering enforcer, a breathing monument to organized violence. His rough voice echoes off the tile, uttering her exact name. In a single breath, her anonymity is incinerated. This is the inescapable tragedy of fate. You can retreat into the shadows, but the moment you intertwine your life with another person's suffering, their darkness will inevitably hunt you down. "How do you know my name?" she whispers. The enforcer offers only a dead, unblinking stare, stripping away the last fragments of her agency. He states flatly that Mr. Romano wishes to see her, clinging to the illusion of safety. Nora attempts to assert a boundary, claiming she just wants to finish her shift. It is a heartbreakingly naive defense against an unstoppable force. The henchman lets a suffocating silence fill the sterile room. He insists it is merely an invitation, not a demand. The dark irony is palpable. An invitation from the devil is simply a violent threat wearing a tailored suit. Nora's breath hitches as the trap snaps shut. In a world built on ruthless dominance, politeness is merely the velvet mask that absolute power wears, patiently guiding you to lock your own cage from the inside. You and I have probably screamed when a protagonist willingly marches into their doom. But examine Nora. She touches her wounded arm, yet her mind is consumed by the shattered eyes of that silent child. Her tragic empathy overrides her survival instinct, and she agrees. They escort her into a claustrophobic room that feels exactly like a brutal interrogation cell. The layout is terrifying. 2 stark chairs and a single glass of water. That solitary glass is a masterful cinematic detail. Silently screaming that she is now a captive, Gideon Romano emerges from the shadows. The heavy door clicks, locked behind her. He studies her with the cold hunger of a wolf eyeing a cornered rabbit. Compassion is a beautiful human virtue, but sometimes it is the exact silver thread the devil pulls to drag you into the abyss. The horror deepens as Nora realizes this crime lord has been meticulously analyzing her. "Sit down," Gideon commands, tossing in a hollow please while remaining standing. The blocking is brilliant, forcing her to look up at him, securing his dominance. The lighting is pure cinema. Half of Gideon's face is swallowed by shadows, a stark visual of his psychopathic soul. He stands motionless like a monument carved from black ice, desperate to fade into obscurity. Nora stammers that the flying glass was merely an accident. Gideon's low voice slices through her denial. He coldly deconstructs the cruelty of the event, forcing her to acknowledge the darkness she just stepped into. He pins her down with reality. "You can try to downplay your heroic moments, but the true monsters in the room will always know exactly what you did." The tragic truth settles. The boy is his son. Nora's denial was a desperate defense mechanism, for accepting that a child belongs to a psychopath is too dark to endure. Gideon demands to know why she shielded the boy. Nora lifts her chin, her voice trembling. "She did it because every other coward in that room refused." The camera pushes in on Gideon. Behind his cold eyes, a machine is calculating. In his corrupted mind, altruism is a myth. Failing to find her hidden angle, he executes a masterstroke of manipulation. He lowers his armor, confessing that his son has not spoken a word in 14 agonizing months. He plays her empathy like a tragic symphony. We must learn this painful lesson. The most dangerous predators will gladly weaponize their own shattered lives to sink their hooks directly into your bleeding heart. Gideon paints a tragic picture of a boy locked away from humanity. Then he strikes the fatal blow. He reveals that after the chaos, little Leo did the impossible by holding his father's hand. The tension pulls violently tight. Gideon steps closer. The boy finally spoke. The camera focuses on Nora, her breathing erratic, powerless. She asks what the child said. Gideon lets an agonizing silence stretch between them, suffocating her with suspense. Finally, he whispers, "Her." The word hits like an execution. The color drains from Nora's face. In one heartbeat, she realizes her life is over. By offering a single moment of pure grace, she has forged an unbreakable chain to the devil himself. This is the cruelest cosmic joke. Sometimes, your greatest act of compassion is the exact trap that buries you alive. Let us pause, for you and I are witnessing the absolute demolition of an ordinary life. Nora cannot grasp her terrifying new reality, but she feels the heavy shadow of the underworld closing around her. The true tragedy did not unfold in the chaotic ballroom. It occurred right here, the exact millisecond a ruthless predator realized this waitress was the sole key to unlocking his shattered son. To the fragile boy, she is an angel. To the father, she is a valuable possession to be exploited. The scene cuts to the dead of night. Nora is driving, her white knuckles gripping the steering wheel like the edge of a cliff. The harsh streetlights flash over her terrified face. It is a profound, irreversible reminder of our fragile existence. Destiny never sends a warning before it rewrites your fate. You simply blink, and suddenly you are trapped in a deadly game you never wanted to play. Look closely at Nora through the windshield. Her hands are locked onto the steering wheel at 10 and 2, knuckles bone white. On any other night, she would be driving with one hand, humming to the radio, worrying about groceries. Tonight, the car is drowned in dead silence. Before she escaped that blood-stained room, Gideon Romano executed a flawless predator's maneuver. He slid a blank white card across the table, carrying only a handwritten phone number. A man with the wealth to buy cities took the time to write it himself. He promised to pay for her injuries, wrapping a terrifying emotional hook inside a clean business deal. The hard truth of life is that true manipulators rarely use force. They offer you a little comfort to make you feel safe, right as they slip the poison straight into your pocket. Gideon framed the gesture beautifully, presenting the number as a simple way for her to check on his little boy. When Nora desperately tried to step back, pleading that she did not even know the child, the crime boss merely stared at her and whispered that his son knew her. Checkmate. Now that small piece of cardboard burns against her leg like a live coal. Inside her dim apartment, she tries to play pretend. She tosses the card onto a pile of takeout menus, desperate to believe she can just walk away from this dark obsession. She climbs into bed, praying for sleep. But 3 agonizing hours pass, and her eyes remain wide open to the dark ceiling. It teaches us a painful reality. You can lock a dangerous secret away in a drawer all you want, but you can never hide a guilty conscience from your own mind. Let us pause and look at this moment together. It is exactly 8:15 in the morning, and the shadow of yesterday is already beating down her door. Her phone rings. It is Dennis, her manager, and the poor man can barely force the words from his throat. A corporate ghost named Marcus Vale just called the restaurant, demanding Nora's work schedule for the next 2 weeks. Nora sits up in bed, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs, sensing the jaws of the trap. Dennis is nearly weeping, swearing he refused to hand over her shifts, begging to know what truly happened in that private room. He smells the blood in the water. We often learn too late that when a predator decides you belong to them, the walls close in before you even realize you're the prey. The caller did not politely ask for her hours. He demanded them with the cold, hollow authority of a man who already owns your future. Nora stares blindly at the ceiling plaster, desperately trying to construct a lie she can live with. She whispers to Dennis that Gideon just wanted to express his gratitude, but Dennis lowers his voice to a terrified rasp. He asks if she comprehends the monster they are dealing with. Romano is a phantom who bends reality to his will. He reminds her of the 3 city leaders who resigned overnight, and the federal prosecutor who vanished from a massive trial. Romano destroys lives and leaves absolutely 0 fingerprints behind. The saddest truth in life is that power does not care about your good intentions, and now that absolute power is looking directly at her. Through the speaker, Dennis is practically trembling, trying to make her see that earning a favor from a ruthless crime lord is an absolute death sentence. The terrifying reality finally crashes over Nora. Yet, she simply instructs Dennis to hand over her schedule. It is pure blinding denial. She drops the phone and presses her palm fiercely against her thigh, fighting the violent tremors. The bandage on her arm throbs with a dull ache, a permanent receipt for the violence she dared to touch. She rises to brew coffee, pretending the morning sun is just like any other. It shows how desperately human beings cling to routine when their world falls apart. But the clock is already ticking. By Tuesday morning, her phone screen suddenly illuminates with an unknown number. Let us watch her make the mistake we all fear making. Any rational person would ignore that ringing phone to stay alive. But fate demands a tragedy, and her trembling fingers answer the call. Elise Vinn is on the line. Speaking with the chilling precision of a machine, she serves the kingpin, and she calmly states that Romano wants Nora to meet with his little boy's personal therapist. Nora freezes entirely, the kitchen counter digging into her white knuckles. Elise mentions a Dr. Hannah Yoon, claiming the doctor merely has a few gentle questions about the gunfire from that terrible night. Then comes the velvet trap, assuring Nora she is under no pressure to agree. We must always remember that giving a captive the sheer illusion of free will is the fastest way to lock the cage. The fixer leans heavily into the deception, promising that her powerful boss wants to give Nora total freedom. Finding a brief spark of defiance, Nora demands to know why Romano could not make the call himself. Elise allows a heavy, suffocating silence to fill the line. That silence is a carefully swung blade. Elise finally murmurs that Romano avoids direct contact so he does not frighten anyone. The dark irony is staggering, as speaking to a merciless syndicate fixer is endlessly worse. Nora stares blankly out her window at the quiet morning street, realizing her ordinary life is being swallowed by the dark. It reminds us that fighting the inevitable only drains your spirit. Knowing she cannot outrun a ghost, her shoulders drop. She asks for the address sealing her own fate. Elise offers to send a private car, a subtle flex of endless resources, but Nora insists on driving herself. It is a desperate attempt to pretend she still holds the steering wheel of her own life. Then the frozen facade breaks, and Elise speaks from the chest. She reminds Nora that every person in that blood-soaked room knew the boy's identity, and every single one chose to flee. Everyone except Nora. The quiet click of the severed call leaves Nora standing alone in her kitchen, the crushing weight of her own kindness settling over her. Sometimes, Our purest moments of compassion carry the heaviest, most devastating price tags. By Thursday morning, Nora walks into the pristine clinic bracing for a cold interrogation, only to find the script entirely flipped on its head. One would naturally assume a therapist employed by a violent crime syndicate would wear heavy layers of clinical armor. Instead, Dr. Yoon floods the room with a disarming, radiant warmth. She steps forward and takes Nora by the hands, holding them tightly to melt away the terror. The doctor laughs softly, joking that Mafia diplomacy was never part of her job description. It is a brilliant, terrifyingly gentle strategy. Nora finally exhales, deeply relieved to feel seen. But watch the sharp gleam in the doctor's eyes. Beneath the warm smile, she is dissecting Nora's every breath, mapping her micro-expressions, and weighing the heavy silence. It teaches us that the most dangerous predators do not always carry weapons. Sometimes they carry a smile while they search for your weakest point. Dr. Yoon swiftly transitions to the bleeding heart of the matter. For 14 agonizing months, she has fought to pull little Leo out of absolute silence, measuring progress in heartbreaking fractions. Then, she drops the devastating truth. Following the horrific bloodbath, the shattered child reached out for his terrifying father and spoke a single word. That word was about Nora. The young woman already knew this, but the doctor leans across her polished desk with a quiet confession. Before that night of violence, Yoon was preparing to recommend a long-term psychiatric facility for the boy. They had run out of hope. True despair is reaching the end of the line with a child's soul. And the universe proves that salvation often arrives in the shape of a stranger taking a bullet. The atmosphere in the room grows so incredibly dense, it is difficult to breathe. The doctor explains that a deeply traumatized child breaking his silence is a sheer miracle. It requires a profound jolt to the spirit to conquer such paralyzing terror. Nora stares at her trembling hands, desperately arguing that the little boy does not even know her name. But Dr. Yoon softly dismantles that defense. A child does not care about names. He only cares about actions. He watched a complete stranger throw herself into a storm of bullets just to shield his small body. We all need someone to stand between us and the dark. The boy had spent his entire life watching powerful adults abandon him. The moment the guns roared, in a world full of monsters, Nora was his very first hero. Stay with me here, because this is the exact moment the steel jaws of the tragedy lock forever. That broken child's soul claimed Nora as his guardian angel, long before his mind understood the words. You can physically watch the crushing weight of responsibility drag Nora under. When she quietly asks what shattered the boy to begin with, Yoon carefully sidesteps the Mafia gore. She merely states the child witnessed a horror so absolute. His brain chose total silence as a survival mechanism. It is a heartbreaking lesson that innocence dies. The moment a child learns the world is not safe. Pushed against the emotional wall, Nora finally demands to know what the family wants from her. The answer is freezing. The crime lord expects her to become the permanent psychological anchor for his son. The camera lingers on the sterile office, where they pitch this to Nora as a perfectly safe science project. Dr. Yoon sits across from her, those cold, analytical eyes calculating every breath. Yoon softly praises her natural gift for trauma, testing if she is truly naive to this bloody mafia circus. Watch the panic take hold of her. Nora physically shrinks into her leather chair, her gaze darting to the ceiling, desperately seeking an escape. Her voice trembles as she plays the Waitress card, insisting she has zero medical training, terrified of shattering an already broken child. But Yoon simply smiles and gently closes the metaphorical cage door, whispering empty promises of controlled conditions. It is a quiet reminder for all of us, the most dangerous traps in life are the ones decorated to look like safe havens. Let us pause the frame and look at Nora, her brow deeply furrowed as she asks the ultimate question. What does a violent kingpin like Gideon Romano actually want? Dr. Yoon does not even blink, the harsh light masking her true thoughts. She calmly claims the mobster only wants his mute son to speak again. Yoon survives this underworld by playing dumb, refusing to dissect the motives of a criminal mastermind. Nora sees right through the lie, lifting her chin to pretend she is making the choices. Yet, by the next morning, the tragedy takes root and she completely folds. 3 days later, she marches boldly into a high-tech trap, unaware she is the specimen. We must always remember that our fierce desire to save broken people often blinds us to the dangerous traps waiting in the shadows. The camera pushes slowly into this serene room. Warm lighting bathes the floor, while Dr. Yoon hovers in the corner like a silent ghost. Little Leo sits frozen at a tiny table, a living statue of grief. When Nora steps inside, he looks up, and the frame hits you right in the chest. This shattered boy possesses the exact same dark, empty eyes as his ruthless father. It is a chilling, heavy standoff, a damaged child testing the woman who foolishly believes she can heal him. Nora exhales softly, lowering herself into the chair to speak. Slowly, the kid reaches out and grips a single crayon. The invisible game of chess begins. It teaches us a vital truth: taking that first quiet step toward human connection often demands far more courage than swinging a sword on a battlefield. You and I will unpack this beautiful disaster together. The young boy, drowning in 14 months of silence, pushes a red crayon across the table. Nora takes the bait instantly. She carries a massive savior complex, completely blind to the steel jaws snapping shut. She genuinely believes fate brought her to this chair. Meanwhile, just inches away behind the two-way mirror, Gideon Romano stands in the dark. For 37 agonizing minutes, he does not blink. He is a control freak, obsessively monitoring his new pets. The deep heartbreak is watching Nora willingly hand over the keys to her own cage. It is a tragic reality we often face. Sometimes we are so eager to find a grand purpose in life, we mistake a predator's cold manipulation for a beautiful, magical destiny. Notice the tension as Gideon ignores Marcus, his lethal shadow standing mere feet away. Marcus knows better than to interrupt the dark silence of a sociopath. Gideon watches through the glass as his son slides the crayon, and for a tragic second, his jaw tightens. He buries the paternal ache instantly, because monsters cannot afford to feel. Marcus leans, whispering that they utterly destroyed a man named Sterling overnight. Gideon offers only a dead, mechanical nod. Then, the atmosphere shifts as Marcus drops his voice half an octave. In this brutal underworld, that quiet tone signals imminent death. It teaches us a chilling lesson about pride. No matter how high you build your walls, or how untouchable you feel, there is always another predator waiting in the shadows. The camera pans as Marcus explains the security tapes, and Gideon violently tears his gaze from the glass. Marcus holds eye contact, showing sheer bravery against a cornered kingpin. He reveals that someone intentionally sent Sterling to the child's table. Gideon goes perfectly still. It is the terrifying frozen silence of a shark right before it snaps. He demands a name. Marcus admits the phantom was disguised, offering one chilling detail: a massive, jagged scar slicing across his jawline. The air becomes suffocating. A horrific scar in this underworld never means peace is brewing. It is a harsh, universal reminder that our darkest past mistakes always leave a permanent mark, and eventually, those buried sins will come violently knocking at our front door. Hearing about the scar, Gideon's stoic expression fractures. The lighting catches a flicker in his eyes, not fear, because his vast ego cannot process terror, but the grim recognition of a bloody ghost returning. He slowly turns back to the mirror. Inside, little Leo is violently carving tangled lines with a blue crayon, casting anxious glance at Nora. She ignores the chaos, pouring her raw empathy directly into the child's broken soul. Gideon watches her soft posture, his rigid shoulders tensing, as if his very skin is crawling. We have to face this bitter truth together. A man driven entirely by the obsession to dominate will always be terrified of genuine connection. It shows us that pure love and true empathy are the only real forces on this earth that a tyrant can never, ever control. It shakes Gideon to his dark soul to watch Nora abandon her professional boundaries just to comfort his son's fragile emotions. The violent puzzle snaps into focus. That scarred hitman deliberately used a drunk civilian to terrify the boy, probing the Mafia's defenses. But Nora shattered their experiment by leaping in to play the hero, completely oblivious to the cartel crosshairs locking onto her. She painted a target on her back to shield a monster's child. Instantly, Gideon orders his men to excavate every hidden secret of her life. It is the tragic reflex of a true villain. The moment unpredictable kindness enters his cold world, he must destroy its mystery. It teaches us that true peace will always elude those who believe they must own and control people just to feel safe. Gideon demands the complete ruin of Nora's privacy. He orders years of financial records and every friend placed under a microscope. Marcus asks if she is an enemy spy, but Gideon dismisses it. He knows her dangerously pure heart makes her a wild card. The rival syndicate treated the ballroom like a chessboard, prodding the pieces. Nora's desperate urge to play the savior ruined their equations. As Marcus leaves, little Leo slowly turns his head, staring directly at the two-way glass. He cannot see his father, but he feels the suffocating chill. Trauma is such a cruel, heavy teacher in this life. It leaves a permanent mark, gifting a wounded child an undeniable sixth sense for monsters, even when that dark, towering monster is their own flesh and blood. The camera focuses on the boy. He does not know his father is behind the glass. It is the raw instinct of a wounded animal feeling a hunter's stare. Retreating, he scribbles a massive figure shielding a tiny one. This child is silently begging for protection against his own blood. We cut to Nora blissfully sitting in her car. She knows nothing of the scarred phantom, the mob war, or the assassins idling in black sedans outside her home. Her mind is anchored only to that fleeting emotional connection. She sits paralyzed by her sweet naivety. You and I can only watch her cling to this fragile bubble, forced to remember a brutal truth. Choosing to close your eyes to the darkness and play blind is always the fastest way to lose your soul in the middle of a ruthless war zone. The camera stays with Nora in her car, endlessly replaying the moment Leo pushed that red crayon. She pictures how the boy's terrified face softened for a heartbeat. It was the first true crack in his armor. She recalls the staff buzzing with shock because he made eye contact 3 times, yet the tragedy lies just beneath. This desperate trust is laying the bricks for a devastating trauma bond. Her knuckles turn white gripping the wheel as she shifts her thoughts to Gideon. She remembers the hollow echo of his voice discussing his own mute son. It was the cold tone of a man discarding broken machinery. It shows us a grim reality about human nature. The darkest souls survive their guilt by completely stripping the humanity away from the people they have broken. She turns the key, oblivious to the black sedan sliding out behind her. They maintain 2 car lengths, executing textbook surveillance. Nora believes she is a strong woman steering her own destiny, unaware she is merely a pawn on a mobster's board. Later, under the scalding water of her shower, she rehearses excuses out loud. She promises herself she can walk away, but the hook is buried deep. At 3 a.m, shadows stretch across her ceiling as she lies awake, haunted by the memory of that red crayon. The psychological trap is flawless. Before sunrise, her trembling hand picks up the phone to book another session. The greatest tragedy of playing the savior is believing you are throwing someone a lifeline, when in truth, you are the captive already drowning. When Nora finally makes the call, the receptionist confirms her appointment without a single tremor of surprise. The deadpan delivery is brutal. It proves Gideon already mapped her mind, predicting she would inevitably crawl back. A cold shiver races up Nora's neck. She cannot name this dread, but it is the primal terror of a predator entirely decoding your soul. Cut to the second session. Little Leo sits silently by a puzzle. The moment Nora crosses the threshold, the boy lifts his head, locking onto her eyes for 3 agonizing seconds. To anyone else, it is nothing. But in the fragile world of trauma bonds, that gaze seals her tragic fate. We all eventually learn that the traps we fall into hardest are the ones we willingly walk toward. Notice how the boy deliberately pulls out the empty chair across the table. He is physically constructing a bridge for her. Nora sits, cloaking her anxiety under a mask of calm, speaking about the cardboard pieces as if they are the only things left in the universe. She slides a piece forward, mirroring his heavy energy. Listen to her describe the jagged edges. It is accidental poetry, detailing the sensation of surviving inside a shattered mind. The boy takes the piece, granting her a split second of profound validation. Anyone else would smile, but Nora remains carved from stone. She understands the stakes. The hardest lesson we ever learn is that true trust is never built with grand gestures, but by sitting quietly in the dark with someone until they are ready to heal. Let us watch this unfold together, you and I. Nora offers him a dry, pragmatic nod. There is no fake cheering that would force an abused child to slam their defensive walls back up, but pause the frame. 40 minutes in, the boy actually reaches out. He holds a single puzzle piece in the air, forcing her to lean across the table to close the gap. It is a monumental leap of faith. As Nora takes it, you can practically see the tight swallow in her throat. She is getting dangerously tethered to this boy. And the bitter irony? Gideon, the man who controls everything, is nowhere near the glass to witness his son coming back to life. You can own the entire world, but you will still miss the moments that truly matter if your eyes are turned the wrong way. Gideon is purposefully starving the observation room of his suffocating gravity. For a man addicted to dominance, forcing himself to look away is agonizing. He knows his predatory aura bleeds through the glass, so he locks himself inside his towering corporate fortress instead. He glares at a shadow dossier, reading it twice before slapping it down on his desk, like a judge delivering a sentence. The operative inside now possesses a phantom alias, entirely scrubbed from any police database. Gideon's underground network makes the authorities look utterly powerless. It is genuinely terrifying to behold. The grand, inescapable tragedy of power is that the more heavy walls you build to keep the dangerous world out, the more you realize you have merely constructed a beautiful, lonely prison for yourself. Let us open this psychological file, because this is the frame where the villain's armor finally splinters. The alias belongs to Harlan Voss, a ghost from a dark gap in Gideon's past that he tried to wipe from the earth. Gideon possesses a suffocating need for total control. He discards the report, summons Dr. Yoon, and stares out across the Chicago skyline, treating the city like his personal chessboard. But here is the cinematic gut punch. A true enemy knows that to destroy a powerful king, you never aim for his heavy crown, you aim the blade at his little prince. It is a brutal reality check. Absolute control is nothing but a fragile illusion. A painful lesson we all learn when our iron defenses eventually fail and leave the people we love entirely exposed to the dark. Picture the tensions as Dr. Yoon walks right into the lion's den. She keeps her notepad shut on her lap, holding an unyielding boundary against a man who weaponizes vulnerability. She gives him the deadly serious look of a surgeon delivering a terminal diagnosis. Gideon demands the update, and she drops the bomb. Little Leo actually handed Nora a puzzle piece. It shatters the defensive shell Gideon forced his son into for a year. Gideon nods slowly, pretending he grasps the gravity of this attachment. But men like him cannot comprehend true dependency. Yoon is about to shatter his worldview, because here is the absolute truth. You cannot manage human emotion on a sterile spreadsheet. It behaves exactly like floodwater, eventually finding and breaking through every single crack in your carefully built foundation. I want you to watch what happens when the session ends. Nora stands and the boy mirrors her instantly. He walks around that heavy table, abandoning his ultimate defensive barrier, and just stands closely beside her. There is no touching, just a profoundly heavy, silent proximity. When Yoon recounts this to Gideon, her professional voice is trembling. She is watching a shattered child anchor his soul to a stranger. Gideon glares at his mahogany desk as if he can hide his panic behind it. But Yoon leans forward, utterly fearless. She demands the raw truth from a man who scripts every word he speaks. She has to know why this specific woman unlocked his son. True clarity always demands we completely strip away our own selfish pride before the reality of a situation can finally step into the light. The velocity of this trauma bond defies every clinical textbook. This is not just a terrified child clinging to a savior after the gala's violence. Yoon realizes the devastating twist. The boy is subconsciously trying to replace a shattered piece of his past. She backs Gideon into a corner, and after an agonizing silence, the untouchable kingpin finally cracks. It was his mother. Leo's grandmother used to sit at a tiny table with him, just pushing a cup back and forth, sliding a crayon. It was an incredibly fragile, beautiful exchange of unconditional trust. The tragic image is enough to rip your heart out. It serves as a permanent reminder that our most vital connections are forged in the smallest, quietest moments, long before the chaotic violence of the real world kicks down the door to test them. Gideon's mother was never a kingpin like him. She possessed a quiet superpower. She could spot the invisible fractures in a person's soul. But the memory hits a brutal brick wall, a mundane parking lot, a speeding car. This gentlewoman threw her own body directly between 2 tons of moving steel and her grandson. Gideon physically chokes on the memory, unable to finish the sentence. Dr. Yoon sits there, a rock of clinical restraint. 18 months ago. Gideon whispers into the dark room. The boy watched the entire thing happen. The silence in that luxury office suddenly weighs 1,000 pounds. Some sacrifices leave a blast radius that destroys the generations left behind. At its core, real love is just the terrifying willingness to stand in front of the danger for someone else, no matter the final cost. Stick with me here, because this realization is chilling. Suddenly, Gideon's voice goes completely flat. It is the deadened tone of a man forcing his brain to process tragedy through cold logic. He tries to justify hiding this nightmare as a tactical necessity. But Yoon's professional armor finally shatters. She covers her mouth in raw horror as the pieces snap together. At the gala, little Leo watched another woman jump in front of a bullet for him. He saw the blood all over again. Yoon stares at Gideon, the man who dragged this violence to his son's feet, with burning disgust. History simply copied its darkest chapter for this boy, but this time the surrogate lived. It is the cruelest joke of fate. We are doomed to endlessly repeat our deepest traumas on a loop, right up until we finally learn how to heal from them. This is not just a child developing an attachment. The boy's shattered brain is desperately trying to bring his dead grandmother back to life through Nora. He is attempting to rewrite the ending of his worst nightmare. Yoon jumps up, throwing out the clinical playbook. She looks this dangerous narcissist in the eye, warning him that he cannot simply fire Nora when he feels threatened. The boy's sanity is glued to her. If she disappears, Leo's mind turns to dust. Gideon arrogantly guarantees Nora is not going anywhere, is flexing his toxic need for dominance, but Yoon fires back with the harshest truth of all. His forceful control is the exact root of the poison. You absolutely cannot dictate the loyalty of a human heart with a weapon. It must be given freely, or the entire foundation eventually crumbles into nothing. Let us look at this final piece together. It is Friday morning. Nora finds an envelope slid perfectly under her apartment door. It was placed with an obsessive, terrifying symmetry. The handwriting matches the calculated letters Gideon used at the gala. Standing there in the quiet morning light, Nora pulls out what is basically an emotional bomb. It is a crude crayon drawing. 2 simple stick figures, standing side by side, completely anchored to each other. Above them swirls a chaotic tornado of color. Perhaps it is a sun, or perhaps it is the explosive relief of a traumatized child finally feeling safe. The beautiful irony is that true communication rarely demands a perfect vocabulary. Sometimes, the most heartbreaking cries for connection are drawn in the messy lines we leave behind for someone else to finally find. Picture this with me. The camera lingers on the drawing, tracing the permanent scars pressed into the fragile paper by a child's desperate crayon. Nora stands there, letting the crushing emotional weight of this broken boy's devotion wash over her skin. She slides it back into the envelope, but the glare of her phone shatters the quiet. It is Gideon. The devil himself skips the pleasantries, confessing that his son carried that drawing for 2 whole days before finding the courage to hand it over. Even a ruthless mobster recognizes the weight of it. Genuine vulnerability is a terrifying burden to carry, because when a shattered kid finally offers you their complete trust, they are not just giving you a gift, they are handing you a loaded weapon. The air turns instantly cold. Nora simply says thank you, and for the first time you see the cracks in his perfect facade. The notorious narcissist physically falters. Real, unguarded empathy is entirely foreign to his dark world. He hastily dodges her question, pivoting coldly back to the boy. His tone hardens as he demands the therapist increase their sessions to 3 days a week. He expects a fight, a negotiation, a pushback, but Nora just looks at him and says yes. No hesitation, no fear. In a single breath, she completely shatters his illusion of absolute control. The camera catches the slight twitch in his jaw. It is a quiet reminder that when a tyrant is used to forcing people to their knees, handing them exactly what they want out of pure kindness leaves them entirely paralyzed. This is where the power dynamic fractures. Gideon tries to throw his dirty money at the situation to buy her off, but Nora becomes an immovable object. She looks him dead in the eyes and refuses the cash, knowing the boy is sharp enough to smell a cold transaction. She is doing this solely because she wants to, a truth that completely short-circuits his criminal mind. She gestures to the messy drawing on the desk and asks which stick figure represents the boy. Gideon looks away, quietly admitting his son drew himself as the towering giant. The tragedy of a scared boy trying to look big hangs heavily in the room. It teaches a brutal truth about human nature. The absolute greatest things in this life cannot be bought, and putting a price tag on real compassion instantly turns it to dust. A faint, involuntary smile touches the corners of Nora's mouth. She realizes this traumatized boy is drawing himself as a giant, desperately clawing back the tiny sliver of power the world violently stole from him. That quiet victory holds for 10 fleeting days before the universe shatters the peace. On a dark Tuesday, the bodyguard Elise arrives, looking like a soldier stepping onto a battlefield. She forces Nora into a blacked-out sedan and drives her to a brutal concrete fortress, built for men who sleep with one hand on a gun. The claustrophobic camera angles build the heavy tension. It is a violent reminder of how fast reality shifts. We all get far too comfortable when the days are quiet, but stability is a fragile illusion. Sometimes the floor falls away without a single sound. Let's walk down this freezing hall together. The heavy steel doors slide open, revealing a dead, empty corridor that feels far more like a marble tomb than a family home. Gideon is already standing there in the pale light. The untouchable armor this crime boss usually wears is completely gone. His sleeves are pushed up, his face sags with pure exhaustion, and the arrogant billionaire is dead. In his place stands nothing but a terrified father. His voice cracks as he actually thanks Nora for coming. When she asks what happened, he shoots Elise a look so dark the bodyguard vanishes instantly. It is a tragic, beautiful truth of the human condition. No matter how thick you build your walls, or how much bloody money you hoard, life will eventually find a way to break your heart. Gideon steps back into the suffocating shadows to let her inside. Before Nora even sees the boy, she hears the awful, ragged sound of a child's nervous system completely shutting down behind a locked door. It is a pure, breathless wail of terror that bypasses all logic and strikes her right in the chest. Beside her, Gideon is speaking in a flat, dead monotone, fighting desperately to cage the wild panic vibrating under his own skin. Something triggered his son this morning, and the boy is screaming for Nora. The agonizing sound breaks his father's iron pride into a million jagged pieces on the floor. It hurts to watch, but it reveals the terrifying beauty of real connection. Stepping blindly into the fire, to sit with someone who is hurting is the bravest thing a person can ever do. For 2 agonizing hours, this broken little boy has been chanting a single word into the darkness. Nora. The expensive medical experts stand completely frozen in the background, paralyzed by the fear of making the trauma worse. But Nora does not hesitate for a single frame. 2 sharp knocks and she pushes straight into the dim room. Little Leo is curled up in a rigid ball of pure agony. But the exact second the boy sees her face, you can physically watch the terror drain out of his tiny, exhausted body. She drops to the floor and pulls him tight against her chest, offering his racing mind a solid anchor in the storm. The camera lingers on her steady grip. It is a powerful reminder that when a person's entire world is collapsing, sometimes all they really need is one brave soul to hold them together. A silent, loaded glance passes between Nora and the doctor. They both know the rigid medical playbook is entirely useless here. Her deep bond with this child has conquered the clinical science, and standing right on the edge of the shadows is Gideon. The terrifying criminal mastermind is reduced to absolute helplessness. He watches a stranger soothe the jagged edges of his own flesh and blood, unable to speak a single word. 40 years of building himself into a ruthless monster means absolutely nothing against this kind of pure grief. Later, his cold-blooded hitman Marcus finds Nora hiding in the empty kitchen, staring blankly at a glass of water. Marcus glides in with the terrifying grace of a hungry shark. It is a cold, hard truth of this dark world. Deep trauma waits for no one. The lighting in the kitchen turns harsh as Marcus keeps a deliberate, calculating distance. He knows exactly how to corner his prey without making them bolt. Skipping the hollow small talk, he stares directly into her soul to see what she actually knows about the bloody tragedy that broke the boy's mind 18 months ago. Nora softly admits the polite rumor that the mother died in a tragic accident with the child nearby. Marcus violently tears that fragile lie apart. He drops the ugly truth right on the marble counter. The boy's mother was murdered in cold blood, a sick, violent message delivered to put Gideon on his knees. Marcus watches her pulse race as the horror sets in. We all learn eventually that the real truth is often much darker than the polite stories we invent to sleep at night. The unbearable weight of this tragedy is that little Leo was only 5 years old when the gunshot rang out. Witnessing your mother's execution at 5 years old leaves permanent, jagged scars on the soul. In this quiet, tense shot, you can literally see the terrifying puzzle pieces clicking together behind Nora's eyes. She figures out exactly who ordered the hit, tracing the blood back to the criminal syndicate. The hitman offers a tiny, grim nod of respect for her sharp mind. She realizes the Mafia is watching the broken child, and now they are hunting her too. Gideon dragged her into this heavily armed concrete bunker because it is the absolute only way to keep her breathing. Sometimes you get pulled into another man's war, and the only way to survive is to outsmart the loaded guns. Listen closely to this part. When she demands to know why Gideon truly brought her into this crossfire, the hitman gives a chilling, cryptic answer. He hints that his boss is driven by dark, desperate feelings he refuses to admit to himself. Nora stands perfectly still, realizing she has wandered blindfolded into a literal Mafia war zone, all because she dared to care about a shattered little boy. But here is the cinematic twist. Instead of running for her life, she plants her feet. She is entirely consumed by the need to protect that child, completely abandoning her own safety. Gideon watches her from the doorway like she is a beautiful, incomprehensible alien. The profound lesson here is that raw empathy is a superpower. Caring about another soul more than yourself makes you completely fearless. For a calculated crime boss who always plans 5 bloody steps ahead, a fearless wild card like Nora is a beautiful problem. She immediately weaponizes her new leverage and marches straight into his private office. The camera slowly pans across the absolute chaos of the room. Scattered papers cover every surface, exposing the tortured mind he hides from the world. She refuses to play his games. She locks eyes with the devil and demands the brutal truth about his wife's murder. Gideon does not flinch. He just looks incredibly hollow, like a doomed man who has been waiting years for his oldest ghost to finally kick down the door. He quietly tells her to lock it, his tough facade finally crumbling to ash, because running from your own dark sins is a heavy burden, and eventually the bitter toll must be paid. Let us look closely at the framing here, because you and I can learn so much from the geometry of this room. Watch how she crosses the rug, claiming his leather chair without a single word of petition. She sits there, bathed in harsh light, practically daring the underworld king to strike her down. She demands the brutal truth about the assassins. But the camera lingers on Gideon. The terrifying boss simply freezes. He turns his broad back, unable to meet her gaze. Folding under the crushing weight of his own sins, he whispers that they murdered the only soul he loved, just to bend him. And here is the quiet tragedy of the crown. You can conquer the entire dark world, but if your own blood is caught in the crossfire, your throne is nothing but an empty chair. Let us pause the scene right here. You and I have watched enough tragic heroes bleed to know that physical pain means nothing to a man like Gideon. It only hardens his shell. But then the air in the room goes completely dead. She drops the name, Harlan Voss. Focus tightly on Gideon's face. You can actually see the foundation of his reality shatter behind his eyes. He assumed she was an innocent stray, yet she is speaking the name of the devil himself. Voss is not some dirty street thug. He is a ghost who suffocates lives from a penthouse, laundering blood money without ever staining his own hands. It forces us to swallow a very bitter pill. The most vicious monsters do not lurk in the shadows. They wear silk ties and by the very laws that are meant to cage them. For 4 agonizing years, Gideon has been ripping Voss's empire apart. The murder of his beloved was never just an execution. It was a choreographed display of dominance. And the little boy's silence? That is the lingering, haunting soundtrack of that violence. Listen to the terrifyingly flat pitch of Gideon's voice. It is a brilliant performance of a man packing his grief under thick ice. Voss paraded into that gala solely to prove that expensive security is just an illusion. He wanted Gideon to feel the blade resting on the boy's neck. But now Gideon unveils his masterpiece, a weaponized federal dossier. It reminds us of a fatal human flaw. Obsession will gladly hand you the sword to slay your enemies, but it will always cut your own hands to ribbons while you swing it. He has constructed an iron vault of pure vengeance. Ledgers and statements that took forensic ghosts months to unravel. In 3 weeks, Voss's entire world turns to ash, but a predator always smells the shift in the wind. Crashing that beautiful gala was his sick way of smiling at the family he had already broken. Now the camera drops down. Watch Nora's trembling fingers curling into tight fists. The suffocating dread is finally filling her lungs. She wandered into the center of a blood feud. By loving a broken child, she painted a red target on her own chest. Gideon steps into the light, sealing her tragic fate with a solemn nod. And here is the cruelest joke existence plays on us. The very purity of our love, the one thing that makes life worth breathing, is exactly what gives the world the power to tear us completely apart. Let us look closely at this revelation. You and I know how the criminal machine grinds people to dust. To them, Nora is not breathing flesh. She is just a crowbar meant to crack Gideon's ribs open. Notice the subtle shift in her eyes as her memories flash backward. The dark car idling in the rain, the perfectly timed coincidences. She finally sees the iron bars of the cage Gideon secretly welded around her. A normal mind would shatter into total hysteria, but Nora simply locks her jaw. She bypasses panic and descends straight into the freezing mathematics of survival. She sees the ugly necessity of his manipulation. The saddest truth about surviving a nightmare is that sometimes being totally blind is a gift. If you saw the jaws of the beast from the very beginning, the sheer terror would completely paralyze you. The armor finally cracks. The ruthless king steps out of his shadows and offers her an open door. She can run or she can stay and burn. What happens next is a devastating portrait of trauma bonding. The camera searches her face, finding no fear of the bullets. Instead, her mind is chained to the phantom weight of a little boy resting his cheek against her arm. She is willingly picking up the cross of a murdered mother, binding her soul to the men dragging her into the dark. All her life, she has been sprinting just to stay one step ahead of her own hollow grief. It is agonizing to witness. But here is the brutal law of human suffering. You can run until your shoes melt into the pavement, but true peace only comes when you finally turn around. Dig your heels into the dirt and let your demons hit you. We have all witnessed this tragic phenomenon. The flesh remembers the cut long before the mind realizes it is bleeding. Nora physically feels the sharp glass of that little boy's psyche, turning inside her own chest. She asks for the countdown. When you are dragged into the orbit of a monster, you crave the rigid structure of time to keep from going insane. 45 minutes, Gideon tells her. She does not flinch. Her only thought is for the child. She asks where he will be when the sky falls. Gideon says he will be out of reach, but watch the muscles jumping in his tense jaw. The frame captures his profound self-hatred. It is the darkest, most terrible lesson of any war. In order to hide the ones you love from the wolves, you almost always have to lock them away inside a very different kind of cage. Notice how Gideon retreats into the shadows here. He measures every single syllable, like a man disarming a bomb, desperate to keep the panic contained. His only objective is keeping that boy breathing. Across the desk, the camera isolates Nora in her stark reality. She is just a waitress. She lives in a crumbling apartment and drives a rusting sedan. She possesses no money, no weapons, no armor, yet she is the sole anchor to the child's drifting soul. The silence between them is suffocating. Then, Gideon leans into the light and drops one impossibly heavy word into the quiet room. Stay. It is a stunning cinematic moment that teaches us something profound. True courage has absolutely nothing to do with holding a loaded gun. Sometimes, it is simply planting your feet and refusing to leave when the fire starts. He is not asking her to simply watch the boy. He is begging her to drag them through hell by sheer willpower. We will survive this, he promises. That single word pulls her entirely into his tragic orbit. Watch her hands tremble as she lifts her glass, trying to swallow the terror. Cut to 4 agonizing days later, the harsh lighting finally softens. The boy is staring at a jigsaw puzzle of a fractured blue sky. Notice the brilliant direction here. Nora refuses to crowd him. She avoids his gaze entirely, speaking softly to the empty air, letting his nerves find their own rhythm. She weaves a gentle story about a forgotten garden. It paints a beautiful truth on the screen. If you give a ruined spirit enough quiet grace and space, they will slowly stitch their own broken pieces back together and walk into the light. She speaks of her they're forcing life out of dead soil. Terrible rain, zero warmth. But those twisted tomatoes pushed through anyway. Her mother walked into that miserable yard every spring, completely rejecting the concept of defeat. As the story hangs in the air, the camera zooms in tight. The boy's trembling fingers freeze over a puzzle piece. Slowly he lifts his heavy gaze and locks onto Nora's eyes. He pulls one single word from the dark depths of his traumatized mind: stubborn. The music swells, but Nora does not break character. She holds her expression perfectly still, masking a tidal wave of relief. It is a masterclass in human resilience. True strength does not demand a beautiful garden to bloom. It only requires the absolute, bleeding refusal to surrender to the freezing dirt. She perfectly mirrors his fragile silences, a microscopic nod, a breathless whisper confirming the word. She jazzy eats his brave step, without dropping a terrifying emotional weight on his narrow shoulders. The boy simply lowers his head and places his puzzle piece. But watch Nora. The camera catches the exact second her eyes drop, and the sheer ecstasy of the moment crashes over her face. The grim room suddenly feels drenched in warm gold. Meanwhile, out of focus in the background, the therapist is falling completely apart. Dr. Yoon turns her face to the sterile wall, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Nora does not even glance in her direction, because sometimes the deepest act of mercy you can offer a breaking soul is to simply turn your back and let them weep in the dignity of the shadows. The quiet triumph is shattered the instant Marcus fills the doorway. His body language is agonizing to watch. He carries the rigid posture of a man holding a live explosive. They retreat into the cold hallway, leaving the miracle of the therapy room behind. Marcus delivers the fatal blow. The phantom with the ruined face is Daniel Rowe. For 9 bloody years, he has been Voss's favorite executioner. The camera pushes in on Nora as the horrifying math clicks into place. The gala massacre. The blood on the floor. Marcus offers a grim nod, sealing her death warrant. Rowe has not just been watching her windows, he is already stalking his prey. It forces a terrifying truth down our throats. Closing your eyes to the monster in the dark will never make you invisible. It simply guarantees you will not see the teeth. Let's step into the scene together, you and I, and watch the terrifying mathematics of an apex predator unfold in real time. There is a cold, vast ocean between being watched and being measured. A watcher just keeps your name on a list. A measurer calculates the exact angle of the blade required to break you. The window is closing fast. Nora asks for Gideon's play, and the answer comes down like an iron vault. Immediate evacuation to a fortified bunker. But here in the dim light, Marcus notes something that lands like a physical blow. Gideon used the word please. In 11 years of dragging bodies from war zones, that word never once crossed his lips. His voice fractured on it. It reminds us of a quiet truth. Even the most heavily armored, ruthless heart will eventually be brought to its absolute knees by love. Just freeze the frame for a second and study the hollow shock washing over Nora's face. Marcus stands before her like a slab of concrete, coldly dictating tomorrow's extraction, while her mind violently recoils. The camera pulls back. Just 3 weeks ago, her biggest worries were crinkled takeout menus and a dying sedan. Now, she is the star of an unscripted psychological nightmare, all because a deeply broken little boy finally found the courage to speak. The tragic irony hangs heavy in the room. By reclaiming his tiny, fragile voice, he unwittingly dragged the one person who saved him straight into the crossfire. It teaches us a difficult, enduring lesson we often forget. Sometimes, the purest act of love isn't fixing the world, but simply choosing to walk into the storm anyway. The clock hits 8. The phone vibrates against the wood, the screen glowing with no caller ID. In any tragedy, this is the call you ignore, but the tension in the room is suffocating. Her trembling hand reaches out. She answers. The voice seeping through the speaker is immaculately polite, yet entirely devoid of a soul. It's the dead, hollow resonance of a man who views empathy as a disease. He frames his words as a favor, calmly explaining that she is nothing but a disposable pawn on a very bloody chessboard. The shadows in her apartment seem to stretch longer. Her heart hammers violently against her ribs, her knuckles turning bone-white as she grips the plastic. It's a stark reminder for anyone listening. Fear doesn't always scream. Sometimes it speaks in a polite whisper, waiting to pull you under. Watch the deliberate, agonizing rhythm of this predator's voice. He tells her, almost gently, to ask Gideon about the custody papers. It's a masterclass in psychological demolition, planting tiny, toxic seeds of paranoia deep in her mind. He wants her to believe Gideon is just using her warmth to win a courtroom war. The camera lingers on her wide, terrified eyes as he systematically isolates her, chipping away at the only protective wall she has left. He plays the reluctant hero, the sole truth-teller in a room full of liars. Then the line flatlines into silence. Nora stands entirely paralyzed, the walls spinning around her. It is a brutal reality check we all must face. The most dangerous, ruinous lies in this world almost always arrive, disguised as a quiet, friendly warning. She dials Gideon with shaking fingers the second he answers. She regurgitates every terrifying syllable of that call, her old waitress reflexes kicking in to manage the absolute chaos. Gideon absorbs it all. The silence bleeding through the receiver is heavier than lead. When he finally, the gravel in his throat catches on a single name, Harlan Voss. You can almost see the warmth drain from Nora's skin. Gideon's demeanor shifts instantly, adopting that chilling, clinical tone a commander uses when he knows the body count is about to rise. He connects the bloody dots right then and there. Voss is no longer just watching from the cheap seats. The hunt has begun in earnest. It reminds us of a grim truth. Ignoring the monster in the shadows only guarantees you'll become its primary target. That one suffocating phone call shatters the entire board. Gideon realizes, with a sickening drop in his stomach, that he has to advance his legal strike by 2 full weeks. He starts desperately calling in every corrupt judge, an owed favor just to extract the venom Voss injected into Nora's ear. He tries to manage her panic through the speaker, but she demands he face her. She needs him standing in the exact light where her peace was just murdered. 18 minutes later, the door swings open. He drops into the kitchen chair, his massive frame utterly deflated. The impenetrable armor he wore for a decade is gone, leaving only a terrified father. It shows us something profound. No matter how brilliant your defenses are, the moment you have something real to lose, you become beautifully, terribly fragile. This is what raw, unpolished desperation looks like under harsh fluorescent lighting. Gideon slams his heavy palms onto the wood, spilling the absolute darkest corners of Voss's trap. The mobster is weaving a sickening narrative, claiming Gideon's custody is actively destroying the boy's fragile mind. It is a fabricated, flawless weapon designed to legally kidnap the child before a single punch is thrown. If Gideon fails here, they'll bury his son in a private psychiatric ward run by Voss-paid butchers. The camera captures the sheer agony etched into the father's face. It brings a chilling, essential lesson into sharp focus for us. When someone desperately tries to manipulate your reality, they aren't trying to keep you safe. They are merely building you a slightly more comfortable cage before turning the lock. You and I have to look closely at the twisted, bleeding heart of this tragedy. Nora suddenly sees the massive, invisible web closing around them. Harlan Voss doesn't just want custody. He needs the boy permanently silenced. Little Leo is the sole surviving witness to his own mother's brutal murder. Picture it. a tiny 6-year-old child carrying the rotting secrets of a criminal empire on his frail shoulders. The trauma was so immense he retreated into absolute silence for 14 agonizing months. But now, because of Nora, that dam is starting to fracture. The moment he finds the courage to speak, he paints a bullseye on his own chest. It forces us to swallow a very bitter pill. Sometimes, the very healing we fight so desperately to achieve is exactly what puts us in the greatest danger of all. The silence pooling in that cramped kitchen is thick enough to choke on. Nora stares at the peeling wallpaper, Voss's dead voice echoing relentlessly in her skull. She realizes with horrifying clarity that to a monster of his caliber, human empathy is just a handle to drag you by. Look at the optics through their cold eyes. A ruthless prosecutor, preparing for the legal war of the century, suddenly lets a random waitress into his home to bond with his deeply damaged son. It is a glaring, fatal vulnerability. She looks at Gideon, her voice trembling, predicting exactly how Voss will frame her as a planted manipulator. The tragedy is absolute. It leaves us with a haunting realization. In the hands of a skilled liar, the most beautiful, innocent truth can be warped to look exactly like a premeditated sin. By legally branding the child's miraculous healing as a cynical setup, Voss can obliterate every ounce of progress the boy fought for. Nora looks Gideon dead in the eyes, her voice stripped of anger, desperate for the math to simply make sense. Why keep her around if she was the match that could burn his case down? And Gideon, a man sculpted from ice, breaks. He confesses that his brilliant legal maneuvers burned to ash. The afternoon his broken son sat on the rug and whispered her name for 2 hours. It is agonizing to watch a man who survives on absolute control admit to a fatal tactical flaw just to honor his promise of honesty. It teaches us a beautiful, devastating lesson. Love will ruthlessly dismantle every perfect plan you ever make, and you will thank it as the walls come tumbling down. The camera pans down to the scarred counter. There sits a messy, vibrant crayon drawing her own name scratched out in shaky, uneven lowercase letters. It is just a scrap of paper, but it pulses with life. The ultimate, undeniable proof that a deadened soul is finally waking up. She shifts her gaze to Gideon. His broad shoulders have caved. The untouchable enforcer is completely gone, replaced by a terrified father. She knows exactly what she represents. A ticking time bomb meant to detonate his trial. But here, the Greek tragedy pivots. Instead of running, she plants her feet into the floorboards. She absolutely refuses to abandon the fragile bridge she built to that little boy. It reminds us of real courage. True bravery isn't lacking fear, but understanding that someone else's light is worth defending in the dark. She leans across the table, her eyes completely devoid of hesitation, and tells Gideon to launch his legal strike without blinking. It is a stunning cinematic shift. She is totally immune to the cold terror that normally breaks people. She strips the situation down to the bone. She is just a working-class girl from Wicker Park who sat on a floor to help a crying child. No hidden wealth, no mafia ties. If Voss tries to paint her as some calculating underworld mastermind, a judge will laugh him out of the room. She understands the fatal blind spot of arrogant men. To a predator like Voss, ordinary people struggling to pay rent aren't human. They are simply invisible furniture. It leaves us with one incredibly empowering truth to carry forward. Sometimes, being completely underestimated is the greatest armor you could ever wear. Let us step into the quiet tension of this room together. By wielding her own insignificance as a blade, Nora completely shatters his balance. You can see the shadows shift across Gideon's face, a heavy realization settling into his exhausted bones. He warns her, his voice rough, that she is volunteering to be live bait for a killer. Nora simply holds his gaze, telling him that radical honesty is their only armor. The cold reality is that speaking the truth always leaves you standing bare in the freezing wind. Gideon desperately swears he did not manipulate her into loving his son. She offers a soft, tragic smile, whispering that she already knows. We learn a hard truth here. True connection means seeing the hidden scars in a person's soul and choosing to stay anyway. The camera lingers on her eyes as she reads him like an open book. She knows he did not hide the looming threat for 18 days. Out of malice, he buried it because his primal instinct was to throw his own body over an innocent woman to keep her safe. Gideon stares back, utterly stripped of his polished courtroom defenses. He braced for a screaming argument, but instead, he is paralyzed by the sheer weight of being truly understood. Outside that frosted window, the city blindly marches on. Yet inside, the foundation of a tragedy has locked into place. This exhausted civilian stared directly into a deadly war zone and chose to build her home in the crossfire. The most profound bravery is simply choosing to love someone who brings the storm to your front door. Pause the film on this exact frame, and we can practically taste the bitter panic. The clock is relentlessly bleeding down to the Thursday legal deadline. Marcus paces the floor, flinching at every sharp notification like a cornered animal. Elise and Gideon have completely shut down, retreating into the heavy silence of a trauma response. The lens shifts to Nora. She sits perfectly still in the dim lighting, absorbing the tragic reality that when survival is on the line, people forget how to be human. Right in the center of this storm, the broken little boy is quietly stitching his fractured mind back together. The hardest lesson to accept in any crisis is that fighting often deepens the wound, and the bravest action is to sit quietly and simply observe the chaos. The cinematography here is designed to systematically break your heart. Just 48 hours ago, this profoundly shattered child spoke over a simple puzzle, pulling a warm, unguarded laugh from Nora. It was a fleeting victory so rare the psychiatrist documented the miracle. The boy gripped her hand as if she were a solid wooden beam in a violent sea. The music swells with hope. Then the director viciously cuts the sound. The clinic lobby falls into a suffocating silence. A cartel operative stands near the glass door, radiating the cold menace of an executioner. The illusion of safety shatters instantly. The brutal truth of the human condition is that the moment you finally dare to let your guard down, the dark world always returns to violently collect its debts. Notice the devastating irony framed in this shot. The hitman angles his face, flaunting a jagged scar to broadcast his lethality, sending the boy into a trembling panic. But Nora completely breaks the psychological script. She refuses to flee, and she refuses to freeze. She locks her eyes onto this monster, her expression hardening into absolute stone. The operative leans in, whispering a calculated threat regarding their upcoming legal battle, desperate to see her crack. Instead, the terrified child buries his face deep into her coat, treating this ordinary woman like an impenetrable fortress. The beautiful lesson hiding in the darkness is that the strongest armor is never a man with a weapon, but a quiet soul who simply refuses to let you face your worst monsters alone. This is the tragic climax where the film reaches straight into your chest. Nora gently pulls back the fabric to check his breathing, and the trembling boy looks up, begging her not to leave. The camera captures the profound agony in his eyes. He is not talking about the threat of the hitman. He is drowning in the crushing terror of being abandoned to the darkness all over again. He already watched his own mother perish in a flood of violence, and the trauma is hitting a relentless replay. Slowly, Nora drops to her knees, leveling her eyes with his, and makes a solemn vow she knows she must carry to the grave. He searches her exhausted face, finds no deception, and collapses into her embrace. To earn the fragile trust of a broken heart, you must be utterly, undeniably real. The operatives assumed brute force would send everyone scattering before the trial. They misjudged the iron will they were up against. Suddenly, Gideon bursts through the clinic doors like a violent hurricane, barking frantic questions to mask the sheer terror in his chest. The second the camera shifts to frame his son, all of Gideon's volatile energy evaporates. The boy is practically woven into Nora's side. He looks up at his panting father and delivers the two most devastating words in the script: "She stayed." The bitter tragedy is that Gideon spent his existence running from his shadows, yet it took a civilian stranger to teach his son the true weight of loyalty. Love is not about making grand promises. It is simply about being the person who refuses to walk away when the fire starts. Stick with me, because we need to absorb the magnitude of this cinematic turning point. The traumatized child just delivered a flawless sentence for the first time in 14 agonizing months, speaking it like an undeniable law of physics. Gideon physically shatters on screen. The hardened attorney drops into a heavy crouch, stripped of his words, fighting back a flood of grief he is far too proud to let fall. He reaches out a trembling hand to touch his son, and for the first time, the boy does not flinch, he just receives it. The profound truth echoing in this silent room is that genuine healing only begins the exact second consistency replaces chaos. A mountain of clinical therapy could never achieve what one brave woman did simply by refusing to abandon her post in the dark. The atmosphere in this scene grows thick enough to choke on. The camera pans slowly as Gideon quietly measures Nora, and she dissects him right back with the piercing instincts of someone who has survived her own private hell. It is time for Gideon to embrace his violent nature, and he attempts to hand his son a sanitized lie about handling mundane business. But the boy stares straight through the facade with ancient eyes and names the shadow in the room: the bad man. Gideon physically freezes in the doorway. He realizes deception has lost its power here, so he surrenders to the darkness, softly whispering his agreement. The painful reality we must face is that shielding an injured soul with beautiful lies always inflicts a far deeper wound than simply honoring the ugly, terrifying truth. This sequence is dripping with psychological dread. The 6-year-old processes the horrific reality that his father is marching into a bloodbath with a hollow, terrifying calmness. He asks if the plan will work. Gideon nods, and the boy accepts it like a weary soldier. Once the door clicks shut, the camera captures Nora suffocating under the weight of her own resurrected traumas. Desperate for an anchor, she pulls out a deck of cards to manufacture a fragile illusion of normalcy. Watch the boy's rigid body language. He dominates the table, sharply dictating her moves with absolute authority. It is a brilliant reflection of human nature. When the terrifying universe spirals completely out of your control, you will fiercely wage war just to govern a simple game of cards. This is where the narrative cements itself as a masterful thriller. A text message cuts the heavy silence. Nora scrambles to put on a protective mask, plastering a fragile smile across her face as she whispers that his dad says hello. With a single glance, the child shatters her lie, asking if the deed is done. Stunned, Nora offers a heavy nod. The boy absorbs the grim news with freezing composure, mirroring his father's terrifying stoicism as he commands her to play her next card. He survives the nightmare by molding himself into the very monster deployed to protect him. Nora stares desperately at the ceiling, fighting back tears. The tragic lesson is written in his cold eyes. We ultimately absorb the darkest energies of the deeply flawed people who raise us, whether we want to or not. The dramatic irony here is absolutely incredible. A grown woman whispers that she has no earthly idea how to survive this, and a wounded child solemnly vows to guide her through the dark. Then the phone shatters the peace, and the film violently flips. Marcus calls in with a nightmare revelation. Voss, that arrogant narcissist, actually corrupted a federal judge, buying an agonizing 8-year delay. The camera pushes in on Nora as the cold sweat of panic rises, but stick with me for the twist. Marcus reveals they perfectly predicted this corruption, burying a secret duplicate filing with an untouchable oversight committee. The golden rule of outsmarting a toxic ego is flawless. You simply let the monster celebrate his grand victory, while he quietly digs his own permanent grave. Let us examine the genius of Gideon's courtroom manipulation. That corrupt judge was never the real obstacle, he was a glittering piece of bait. Gideon anticipated this betrayal 8 months ago and constructed an invisible trap. Voss just incinerated 2 full years of dirty money, and political capital obliterating a completely phantom target. The cinematic relief washes over Nora so violently, she simply closes her eyes, finally drawing a real breath. The vigilant boy asks if the shadows are gone, and she graces him with her first genuine smile, declaring it good news. But you and I both know the terrifying reality of a man like Voss. An exposed narcissist trapped in a corner is the most lethal force on Earth. Stripped of his assassins, the darkest truth remains. A desperate villain will always twist the very law itself into his most devastating weapon. The camera pushes in on a stack of legal papers. Voss has completely lost his mind, filing a desperate emergency custody motion. He points his venom directly at Nora, branding her on paper as some dangerous, nameless threat, ruining the boy. It is a pathetic miscalculation. He thinks he can use the system to crush the one woman keeping the child breathing, but this is the tragic flaw in every tyrant. By attacking her, Voss strips away the last of Nora's hesitation. The quiet bystander vanishes. She picks up the phone and dials Patricia Oy, a ruthless attorney whose very whisper makes grown judges sweat. Life teaches us a very simple lesson here. If you push a peaceful soul into a dark corner, you will be the one who bleeds when they finally decide to fight back. Step into that freezing law office. You and I can practically feel the heavy tension as Nora sits across the desk, confirming the terrible motion is filed. Patricia stares at the document like it might explode. She asks for a strategy, and Nora simply offers her entire existence on a silver platter. Every memory handed over willingly. Patricia warns her this is a fatal one-way street. Exposing her past paints a massive target on her back for a ruthless predator. But the camera lingers on Nora. Not a single muscle twitches. She quietly says she has nothing to hide. It is a beautiful lesson about courage. The most unbreakable armor you can wear against total darkness is just the raw truth. Patricia sits back in absolute silence, watching her defy impossible odds. The wall clock ticks loud and hollow at 3:15. The camera captures the weight of ordinary life as Nora drops her history onto the table. 9 years of minimum wage survival, laid out in plain ink. There are no dramatic secrets here. Just the exhausting reality of a woman fighting to stay afloat. Every second spent with that little boy is heavily documented by sterile psychiatric evaluations. She signs her name, sealing her tragic fate. Patricia closes the file, delivering a chilling warning. She says Voss will rip this quiet life apart like a starving wolf. They will dig their claws into the tiniest crack. It teaches us a deeply sorrowful lesson about the world. You can hand a monster your absolute innocence, and they will still try to forge it into a sharp blade to cut your throat. Nora softly tells her lawyer they will not find a single flaw. She walks out into the fading light, rushing home just to see a simple drawing the child made. The scene cuts to 6 o'clock. The heavy front door opens and Gideon steps inside. Notice his rigid posture. He looks like a wounded predator that barely survived a hunt. Do not mistake his heavy sigh for peace. Men bred in violence never relax. We are only witnessing the end of his hypervigilance. Across the dim room, the boy is sprawled on the couch. He fought the shadows of sleep with all his strength, but exhaustion finally dragged him under. It leaves a heavy ache in the chest, proving a cruel lesson. No young child should ever be forced to believe they must keep their eyes wide open just to survive the dark night. The camera pushes close on the sleeping child. This tragic resistance to rest is a desperate survival tactic burned into his bones by a broken family. He passed out while speaking, his pale fingers clutching the wrinkled drawing. Nora and Gideon stand in the shadowed doorway, sharing a fragile silence. Gideon speaks, his voice a low rumble. He mentions the lawyer called, quietly testing Nora. He needs her to realize she just chained her soul to his violent world. But Nora is looking miles ahead. She knows how a toxic man strikes. They will try to burn her life down, only to find a caring woman who protects the weak. It offers us a powerful truth about resilience. Taking your enemy's worst weapon and wearing it proudly as your own shield is often the only way to break their curse forever. In the dim hallway, she whispers that the enemy must stand in court and paint her innocent life as a crime. Then she delivers a line that shatters the quiet room. She says, "I am not afraid of being seen clearly. It is a profound lesson. Absolute transparency is the sharpest dagger you can bury into a monster who only survives in the dark." Gideon is speechless, realizing he is staring at a woman forged in iron. On the couch, the boy surrenders to deep sleep. His tiny hand goes slack, and the drawing flutters to the floor. Nora softly picks it up, brushing her thumb over 3 crooked stick figures. The smallest is safely anchored in the center. The world might call this a tragic trauma bond. But looking at this fractured masterpiece, it is beautifully clear they have bled together to become a true, unshakable family. We open on muted morning light spilling across the bedroom floor. Nora reaches out, her fingers trembling, and props the drawing against the lamp. It must be the first thing the boy sees. 11 days later, the gears of justice grind forward. The custody motion is tossed out. No appeals. The judge pierces the smear campaign, seeing Nora for the bruised but unbroken woman she is. And while she breathes her first real breath in months, the federal net tightens around Voss. Taking down a titan is never a sudden crash. It is a slow, suffocating bleed. The untouchable men at the top are sweating, scrambling in the dark like desperate animals. It reminds us of a simple truth. Life always balances the scales, and the darkest empires inevitably collapse under their own arrogance. Watch how the villains fracture when the lights cut out. Daniel Rowe abandons his territory in 72 hours flat. Marcus delivers the news with a hollow stare, and Voss, the great puppet master, vanishes into the shadows, shattered by a sudden narcissistic collapse. 3 weeks later, the dust settles into a fragile piece. The camera lingers on Nora and little Leo, heads bowed over a puzzle. One piece remains. Leo twists it over and over, his thumb rubbing the frayed edge to soothe his anxious mind. Instead of placing it, he holds it out to her. "You put it in," he whispers. He is not just handing her cardboard, he is surrendering his absolute trust. We learn here that the most unbreakable human bonds are often forged in the quietest, most unassuming moments of our lives. You and I need to pause and look closely at this exact frame. Nora softly nudges him, insisting it is his puzzle to finish, but the boy refuses, pulling her deeper into his orbit. This is not childhood innocence. It is the heavy gravity of trauma bonding. When that final piece clicks into the table, it echoes like a steel vault slamming shut. The boy looks up, and for a terrifying second, his father's paranoid eyes stare back at us. Nora lets out a raw, desperate laugh, dropping her armor entirely. Then, he demands a harder puzzle, one without any blue sky, perfectly reflecting their sunless reality. It teaches us a haunting lesson. We so often mistake shared pain for genuine love, locking ourselves willingly inside a cage, simply because those cold iron bars have grown to feel warm and familiar. The boy's smile catches the warm amber light, making him look like an ordinary 6-year-old. But you and I know better than to trust this staged piece. The moment the child leaves, Gideon steps into the frame. His heavy shadow stretches across the table as he lightly touches the scattered puzzle. Watch the cold shift in his eyes. He is testing Nora. He softens his voice to a whisper, asking a deeply personal question. When a hardened man suddenly drops his armor, it is a calculated ambush. He only feigns weakness to strip away her defenses. Here is a devastating lesson to carry with you. The absolute second a master manipulator looks you in the eye and claims to be entirely vulnerable, that is the exact moment you are in the greatest danger of losing yourself. He holds her tired gaze, the room dead silent, and drops a single agonizing word. Stay. He lets the air stretch, severing the plea from any duty, then begins his dark performance. He stares at his hands, his voice trembling as he whispers that this table is the only place he feels safe. Nora swallows the jagged hook. Her mind races to the anchors he planted. A broken crayon, the bleeding ghost of Sophia, who took a fatal bullet for them now. Nora is being carved into his next human shield. It is a devastating emotional tragedy unfolding before us. We see this dark pattern in life all the time. People often decide their capacity to endure. Immense pain proves their devotion, tragically confusing their utility to a toxic person with their actual inherent worth. Notice the defeated slope of Nora's shoulders. She is hollowed out, running on the fumes of deep exhaustion. She whispers that she is already staying, believing she made this choice. But Gideon pushes deeper. He demands a spoken yes, forcing her to sign a dark contract with her own breath. When she gives him that fatal word, she thinks it is a profound act of loyalty. We are watching the agonizing death of her self-preservation. On cue, the boy wanders back into the warm kitchen light, snapping the beautiful illusion back together. The trap shuts tight, disguised as a cozy evening. Never forget this brutal life lesson. The most dangerous captors never use iron chains to keep you in place. They just hand you the heavy lock and quietly convince you that you hold the keys. The air in the room shifts the second Gideon gets what he wants. He moves with a terrifying, quiet grace, letting the boy dictate their next move. The child marches into the kitchen, blind to the fact that his confidence is just a string pulled by his father. In the heavy silence, Nora stays anchored to her chair. Her trembling eyes trace the finished puzzle, realizing every piece is permanently locked in a trap, and she is the final piece. Rising on unsteady legs, she watches this killer casually make a sandwich like an ordinary dad. It is a suffocating masterpiece of manipulation, and it leaves you and me with a brutal life lesson. We will happily ignore the terrifying, violent darkness standing right in front of us, just as long as it hums a comforting tune while it works. Let us hit pause and look at the tragedy of this frame. 3 weeks ago, she was just an ordinary person, clocking in for a shift. Now she carries the crushing weight of a twisted nightmare, tricking herself into believing this captivity is romance. She has absolutely zero power and no rescue team coming. She traded her entire existence to become a human nightlight for a broken child. She desperately tells herself she is the brave hero. But the bitter truth is that her reality was completely overwritten. And that brings us to the hardest life lesson of all. True sacrifices are never epic movie moments backed by a loud soundtrack. They are painfully quiet. It is the slow, invisible process where you let someone else's complete dysfunction become your permanent definition of a home.
One of the deepest themes in this story is the meaning of staying. Nora enters Leo's life by accident, but she does not leave when things become complicated. She learns that the world around Gideon Romano is dangerous, political, and full of hidden threats. She discovers that powerful people may use her as leverage. Yet she chooses to stay. This is not blind bravery. Nora understands the danger. She knows she is not rich, powerful, or trained for this world. She is a waitress with a modest life, an old car, and no special protection of her own. But she also knows something equally important. Leo has begun to trust her. To leave suddenly would wound him again. This is a meaningful educational lesson about emotional responsibility. When adults enter a child's healing process, their presence matters. A child who has lost trust does not recover through speeches. They recover through repeated proof that someone will come back, sit beside them, listen, and stay. Nora's decision also teaches that love is not only emotion. Love is consistency. Love is showing up after the first dramatic moment has passed. Love is answering the call when a child is scared. Love is sitting at the puzzle table again and again until the child believes safety is real. In modern life, many people want quick impact. They want to help once and move on. But real healing often requires commitment. Nora does not become important to Leo because she saves him one time. She becomes important because she keeps being there. The most beautiful sentence in the story is Leo saying she stayed. That sentence means more than gratitude. It means trust has returned. The lesson is simple. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give another person is not advice, money, or power. It is our steady presence.